Amira Johnson existed as a shadow at Wellington Academy, her scholarship status marking her an outsider among the wealthy elite. For years, she perfected invisibility, while Veronica Taylor and her followers made Amira their favorite target for relentless torment. What they never noticed behind her thick glasses and hunched shoulders was the dangerous patience in her eyes, a predator disguised as prey. Nobody suspected the quiet girl they mocked was actually the granddaughter of a legendary fighter, trained since childhood in a basement gym to deliver strikes that could break bones. Her grandfather's warning always echoed in her mind. Once the wolf shows its teeth, the sheep never see it the same way again. After enduring enough humiliation, Amira finally decided it was time for Wellington Academy to meet the real her. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Wellington Academy stood like a fortress of privilege, its marble hallways and polished lockers gleaming under soft lighting that made everything look expensive. Students moved through the corridors in distinct groups, athletes with athletes, debate team members with their own, and at the top of this carefully maintained hierarchy, Veronica Taylor and her inner circle, Amira Johnson, slipped through these same hallways like a shadow, her head down and shoulders hunched. Her uniform hung loosely on her frame, unlike the tailored fits worn by most Wellington students. Thick glasses obscured much of her face, and her dark curly hair was pulled back severely, as if she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Veronica spotted Amira at her locker and nudged Madison, her second in command. "Look at her. Shoes," Veronica whispered loud enough to be heard. "Third year in a row with the same pair. You'd think scholarship kids would at least try to fit in." Madison laughed on cue. "Maybe she thinks being poor is a personality trait," Amira continued, organizing her books, her expression unchanging as though she hadn't heard, though her grip on her textbook tightened slightly. In Mr. Peterson's history class, students paired up for an assignment. As the teacher distributed heavy textbooks, one slipped from his grasp, falling toward Amira's desk. Her hand shot out with startling quickness, catching the book with perfect balance before it could hit the floor. For a split second, something shifted in her posture. Back straight, movement precise, nothing like her usual awkward demeanor. Then, realizing her slip, she fumbled deliberately, letting the book thump onto her desk. "Sorry," she mumbled, handing it back to the surprised teacher. Madison caught the moment and exchanged a curious glance with Veronica, who had also noticed the uncharacteristic display of reflexes. Later that day, Amira stood at the front of English class, presenting her analysis of Edgar Allan Poe's work. Despite her insightful content, her voice remained soft and hesitant. The narrator's guilt manifests physically through the heartbeat, suggesting that, "God, this is painful," Veronica, stage whispered from the back row. Maybe she should analyze her wardrobe instead. Laughter rippled through the classroom. Amira's words faltered, but she continued, finishing her presentation quickly before returning to her seat, cheeks burning. Mrs. Bennett, the English teacher, gave her a B-, citing poor delivery, despite the content being college-level work. At lunch, Amira sat alone at a corner table, picking at a simple salad. She had just taken her first bite when a shadow fell across her tray. Looking up, she found Veronica standing there, flanked by Madison and Bridget, her loyal followers. "That presentation was something else," Veronica said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She held a cup of cranberry juice precariously in one hand. Amira said nothing, her dark eyes wary behind her glasses. "Oh!" Veronica exclaimed as she stumbled, the juice pouring directly onto Amira's white uniform shirt. The red liquid spread like a bloodstain across the fabric. "These floors are so slippery. Sorry about that." The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Amira remained perfectly still, not even reaching for napkins. Under the table, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white, but her face betrayed nothing. Veronica seemed momentarily taken aback by the lack of reaction, before tossing a napkin onto the table. "Better clean up," she said before walking away, her friends still giggling. After school, Amira took a longer route home, deliberately avoiding areas where Wellington students typically gathered. The modest two-story house where she lived with her grandfather stood in sharp contrast to the mansions that housed most of her classmates. William Johnson sat in his worn leather armchair reading The Art of War when she entered. At 72, he remained physically imposing, broad-shouldered with the straight posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in disciplined physical training. He didn't look up from his book, but his awareness of her presence was evident. "Rough day?" he asked, his deep voice filling the quiet living room. "Nothing new," Amira replied, setting down her backpack. Her grandfather's eyes finally lifted, taking in the red stain on her shirt. His expression revealed nothing, but his gaze was penetrating. "Are you still holding back?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Amira didn't answer, disappearing into the kitchen to start dinner preparations. Her grandfather didn't press, returning to his reading as though nothing had been said. That night, long after her grandfather had gone to bed, Amira descended to the basement of their home. Unlike the modest living area upstairs, the basement had been converted into a training space with mats covering the floor and various equipment lining the walls, heavy bags, speed bags, and wooden dummies for practicing strikes. She changed into simple black workout clothes, wrapping her hands with practiced efficiency. As she moved to the center of the room, her entire demeanor transformed. The hunched shoulders straightened. The tentative posture disappeared. She stood balanced and poised, a fighter's stance. Her first punch hit the heavy bag with surprising force, sending it swinging on its chains. She followed with a combination of strikes so fast they blurred, each landing with perfect precision. For an hour, she trained in focused silence, her movements revealing years of disciplined practice. When she finally stopped, sweat glistening on her skin, she stood before the bag breathing steadily, utterly different from the girl who walked Wellington's halls. Here, alone in the basement, Amira was someone else entirely. Confident, powerful, dangerous. Later, standing before her bathroom mirror, she removed her glasses and stared at her reflection. Without the thick frames, her face revealed striking features and intense dark eyes. She gripped the sink's edge tightly. "How much longer?" she whispered to herself. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, a glimpse of something predatory beneath the carefully constructed prey. Then, with practiced discipline, she forced it down, replaced her glasses, and returned to being the Amira that Wellington knew. The next morning, Mrs. Bennet asked Amira to stay after English class. "Your essay on Macbeth was exceptional," the teacher said when they were alone. "Your understanding of power dynamics and psychological manipulation is remarkably sophisticated." Amira looked down, uncomfortable with praise. "Thank you," Mrs. Bennet hesitated. "I also noticed what happened during your presentation yesterday. I should have intervened, and I apologize for that." Looking up in surprise, Amira found genuine regret in the teacher's eyes. For a brief moment, she considered confiding in her, explaining the daily torment she endured. But then her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "Once the wolf shows its teeth, the sheep never see it the same way again." "It's fine," she said quietly. "I'm used to it." That evening, her grandfather found her staring out the kitchen window, lost in thought. "Why do I have to keep hiding?" she asked suddenly. William joined her at the table, his weathered face serious. "Your mother asked me the same question when she was your age. I told her what I'll tell you. There's power in being underestimated." "It feels more like weakness," Amira countered. "That's the illusion," he replied. "But remember, once you show them who you really are, there's no going back. If you fight back, be prepared for the consequences." Amira held his gaze, something resolute forming in her expression. "Maybe I'm ready for those consequences." The next day at school, whispers followed Amira through the halls. She caught Madison and Bridget watching her in the cafeteria, their heads bent together in conversation. Veronica was notably absent, which was unusual. In sixth period, a folded note passed across several desks reached Amira. She opened it cautiously to find an invitation. "Party at Veronica's this Saturday, 8 p.m. Everyone's invited, even you. Time to bury the hatchet? Suspicion immediately flared in Amira's mind. After years of torment, this sudden olive branch made no sense. Still, a small part of her, the part that remembered having friends before her parents died, wanted to believe it could be genuine. When Mietswine, the bell rang. Madison approached her in the hallway. So you coming Saturday? I don't think so, Amira replied carefully. Look, Madison sighed. I know Veronica's been difficult, but she genuinely wants to make amends. Senior year's approaching and she's trying to turn over a new leaf. The explanation was perfectly crafted, almost believable. Almost. I'll think about it, Amira said finally. That evening, she told her grandfather about the invitation. And you're considering going? He asked, expression unreadable. I know it's probably a trap, she admitted. But what if it's not? Her grandfather set down his book. Sometimes the greatest test is not knowing when to fight, but when to walk away from one. Despite his implicit warning, by Saturday evening, Amira found herself selecting a simple navy blue dress for the party. She left her hair down and traded her glasses for contact lenses. The girl in the mirror looked different, vulnerable without her usual armor, but somehow stronger too. I won't be late, she told her grandfather as she headed for the door. He looked up from his book, concern evident despite his neutral expression. Remember what I taught you, was all he said. The Taylor mansion sprawled across 3 acres in the wealthiest part of town. Music pulsed from inside as Amira approached, cars lining the circular driveway. She hesitated before ringing the doorbell, second thoughts clouding her judgment. Madison opened the door, her smile faltering briefly before widening with forced enthusiasm. Amira, you made it. She pulled her inside, leading her through groups of students who turned to stare. Conversations paused, followed by urgent whispers. Veronica's out back, Madison explained, guiding Amira through the house toward the patio. She's going to be so surprised you came. The backyard was elaborately decorated with string lights and lanterns. Students gathered in small groups, most holding red cups, watching Amira with barely concealed interest. Wait here, Madison instructed, leaving Amira alone near the pool house. I'll get Veronica. Minutes passed, increasing Amira's discomfort. She was about to leave when Veronica finally appeared, wearing a striking red dress that probably cost more than Amira's entire wardrobe. You actually came, Veronica said, her tone carrying a note of triumph that set off warning bells in Amira's mind. I'm so glad. Bridget appeared, offering Amira a drink. Try this. House specialty. Amira took the cup but didn't drink, her instincts screaming caution. Thanks for inviting me, she said, trying to gauge Veronica's true intentions. Of course, Veronica replied smoothly. Everyone deserves a chance to fit in. She checked her phone, then smiled more genuinely. Oh, it's time. For the toast. Come with me, Amira. I want you front and center for this. The warning in Amira's mind grew louder as Veronica led her toward a small stage where the DJ had stopped the music. Students gathered around, many with phones raised, their expressions a mix of anticipation and amusement. Everyone, listen up, Veronica called out, keeping one arm around Amira's shoulders in a mockery of friendship. I want to make a special toast to Amira Johnson, who's joining us for the first time tonight. Cheers erupted, unnaturally enthusiastic. Amira tensed, scanning the crowd and noting positions and distances, a habit drilled into her through years of training. Veronica raised her glass. To new friendships and fresh starts. The crowd echoed the toast, and Amira sensed movement above her a split second before disaster struck. She started to move but hesitated, revealing her reflexes now would expose everything she'd hidden for years. That moment of hesitation proved costly. A bucket of thick pink paint dumped from the balcony above, drenching her completely. The cold shock of it stole her breath as the viscous liquid covered her hair, face, and dress. For a heartbeat there was silence, and then laughter erupted, cruel, mocking, and accompanied by the clicking of dozens of phone cameras capturing her. Humiliation. Amira stood frozen, paint dripping from her eyelashes. Through the pink haze, She could see Veronica's triumphant smile and the sea of faces contorted with laughter. "Pink is definitely your color," Veronica said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Consider it a makeover on the house." Something inside Amira shattered in that moment. Not her composure, which remained eerily intact, but the last restraint that had kept her true nature hidden. She calmly wiped paint from her eyes, her movements deliberate and controlled. She looked directly at Veronica, holding her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. The laughter around them gradually died down as students sensed the shift in atmosphere. Without a word, Amira turned and walked away, her pace measured, her back straight despite the humiliation. "Aren't you going to cry?" Veronica called after her, clearly frustrated by Amira's composure. "Come on, paint girl, give us the tears." Amira didn't respond, didn't look back as she made her way through the stunned crowd. Students parted before her, some still snickering, others watching with uncertain expressions. She walked home like that pink paint drying on her skin and clothes, attracting stares from passing cars. Her grandfather was still awake when she arrived, sitting in his usual chair. He took in her appearance without comment, his expression revealing nothing. "She set me up," Amira said, her voice steady despite everything. They all did. He nodded once, then disappeared upstairs, returning with towels and a change of clothes. "Clean up," he said gently. "We'll talk after." In the shower, Amira watched pink paint swirl down the drain, scrubbing until her skin felt raw. The dress was ruined, the memory of the humiliation seared into her mind. Yet something else had awakened inside her. A cold, calculating clarity. That hadn't been there before. By Monday morning, the video of Paint Girl had spread throughout Wellington Academy. Students Amira had never spoken to knew her name now, pointing and laughing as she walked through the halls. Some mimicked being splashed with paint when she passed. Others simply called out the new nickname that had been assigned to her. "Hey, Paint Girl, need an umbrella today? Watch out, she's dripping." Through it all, Amira maintained the same outward appearance, head down, glasses on, uniform neat and proper. But something had shifted beneath the surface. She no longer flinched at the taunts or quickened her pace to escape. Instead, she moved with a subtle new confidence that went largely unnoticed amid the mockery. That evening, she sat in her darkened bedroom, watching the video of her humiliation for the 20th time. The clip had over 2,000 views now, with comments ranging from casual cruelty to outright viciousness. She studied it with clinical detachment, her breathing slow and controlled as she mentally calculated distances, angles, and the precise amount of force it would take to break each limb of every person who had laughed. The door opened without a knock, and her grandfather entered, watching her replay the video again. "How many times have you watched it?" he asked. "Enough," Amira replied, her voice eerily calm. He studied her for a long moment before turning to leave. Instead of offering comfort or outrage, he went to his bedroom and retrieved something from the back of his closet, an old wooden box, simply crafted but beautiful in its way. He brought it to the kitchen table and set it down without explanation before walking away. Amira followed, drawn by curiosity. The box was familiar. She'd seen it all her life but had never been allowed to open it. Now it sat before her, clearly an offering. With careful hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded red velvet, lay a pair of combat gloves. They were well worn but meticulously maintained, the leather supple from years of use and care. She recognized them instantly from the few photographs she had of her mother, a champion fighter in circles that existed below the surface of polite society. Amira lifted them reverently, feeling their weight. They represented heritage, power, permission. Her grandfather had finally deemed her ready to claim her birthright. The next morning, Amira walked into Wellington Academy without her glasses for the first time. Her hair, usually tightly controlled, hung in its natural curls. The changes were subtle, nothing dramatic enough to draw immediate attention, but those who looked closely might have noticed the straight posture, the purposeful stride that replaced her former shuffle. In third period math, Madison deliberately stuck her foot into the aisle as Amira approached her desk, a childish trick that had worked countless times before. Without breaking stride, Amira, sidestepped the obstacle with fluid precision, continuing to her seat as if nothing had happened. Madison blinked in confusion, looking to Bridget, who had also noticed. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the small group of students who had been watching, expecting the usual stumble and accompanying laughter. After the final bell, Amira headed toward the school exit, walking alone as usual. She had nearly reached the doors when a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her sideways into an empty classroom. Madison stood there, accompanied by two senior football players, Tyler and Jason, who often did Veronica's dirty work in exchange for invitations to her exclusive parties. "We need to have a little chat," Madison said, her voice carrying a false bravado. "You've been walking around like you're not a complete joke, and it's getting on Veronica's nerves." Tyler moved to block the door while Jason stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. "Just a friendly reminder of where you stand," he said, with a smirk. "At the bottom," Madison added. "Always at the bottom." Amira stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she assessed the situation with calm precision. 3 opponents, confined space, multiple exit points. She'd run scenarios like this with her grandfather 100 times. Jason mistook her silence for fear and reached out to shove her shoulder. "Hey, paint girl, we're talking to—" His words cut off as Amira's hand shot up, catching his wrist in a grip that belied her slender frame. With a precise twist and pivot, she used his own momentum to drive her other palm into his solar plexus, a strike delivered with perfect control, just enough force to drop him to his knees, gasping for breath without causing permanent damage. Tyler froze by the door, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to fear. Madison took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell?" she whispered, looking from Jason's crumpled form to Amira's composed face. Amira straightened, her posture reflecting years of martial training that she no longer bothered to hide. She turned to Madison, who flinched instinctively. "Next time," Amira said quietly, leaning close enough that only Madison could hear. "I won't be so kind." She stepped around Jason, who was still struggling to regain his breath, and walked past Tyler without a glance. He pressed himself against the wall, making no move to stop her as she left the classroom. Word spread quickly about what had happened. By the next morning, Jason had downplayed the incident, claiming he'd tripped to save face. But Madison knew what she'd seen, and her fear was evident in the way she now avoided eye contact with Amira in the halls. Veronica, however, refused to believe the rumors. When Madison tried to warn her, describing how Amira had moved with trained precision, Veronica laughed it off. "She's just getting lucky," Veronica insisted, tossing her blonde hair over one shoulder. "Maybe Jason really did trip. He's not exactly graceful." Madison shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "I'm telling you, V, something's different about her. It wasn't luck. It was scary." "Please," Veronica scoffed. "She's a nobody who got paint dumped on her head. End of story." Her eyes narrowed as she spotted Amira across the cafeteria. "But if she thinks this little stunt will change anything, we'll make her regret it." As she spoke, Amira looked up, meeting Veronica's gaze directly for the first time in years. There was something in that look, a cold certainty, a patient hunger, that made Veronica falter mid-sentence. For a fleeting moment, doubt crossed her face before she masked it with practiced disdain. But Madison had seen it, and so had Bridget, a crack in the armor of the girl who had ruled Wellington with fear and manipulation for as long as anyone could remember. Unnoticed by the students rushing between classes, the power dynamic at Wellington Academy had begun to shift, imperceptibly at first, but with the inevitable momentum of an avalanche that would eventually engulf them all. The incident with Jason and Madison had sent ripples through Wellington Academy. While the official story remained that Jason had simply tripped, the uncertainty in Madison's eyes told a different tale. For the first time since Amira had arrived at the school, fear had begun to creep into the hallways. Not fear of Veronica's social power, but something more primal. Madison avoided Amira in the hallways now, pressing herself against lockers when they passed each other. The few times their eyes met, Madison quickly looked away, her usual confidence replaced by unmistakable anxiety. Veronica noticed this change in her friend and grew increasingly irritated. "What is wrong with you?" Veronica demanded during lunch, watching Madison nervously scan the cafeteria. "You're acting like she's going to attack you or something." "You didn't see what I saw," Madison replied, her voice low. "It wasn't normal, V. Nobody moves like that without training." Veronica rolled her eyes. "So she got lucky once. Big deal." "Wasn't luck," Madison insisted, but fell silent as Amira entered the cafeteria. The change in Amira was subtle, but undeniable. She no longer hunched her shoulders or averted her gaze. Instead, she walked with quiet confidence, her dark eyes scanning the room with calm assessment. When her gaze landed on Veronica's table, she didn't look away. She stared, unblinking, until Bridget shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "She's being weird again," Bridget muttered. "Ignore her," Veronica commanded, though she found herself unable to follow her own advice. Something about Amira's stare made her skin prickle with unease. The next morning, Veronica arrived at school early to meet with her debate team. When she opened her locker, a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. She picked it up, expecting a note from an admirer or one of her friends. Instead, in perfectly formed handwriting that seemed almost mechanical in its precision, were 5 simple words. "Are you still laughing now?" There was no signature, no clue to the sender's identity, but Veronica knew instantly. She crumpled the note in her fist, glancing around the empty hallway as if expecting to find Amira watching from the shadows. The hallway remained empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Later that day, Rachel, one of Veronica's newer followers, burst into the girls' bathroom looking pale and shaken. "What happened to you?" Bridget asked, pausing in the middle of applying lip gloss. "I just saw the weirdest thing," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly. "I went to get my gym clothes and heard noises from the old weight room. You know nobody uses that place anymore, right? So I looked through the window and—" She hesitated. "And what?" Veronica prompted impatiently. "It was that girl, Amira. She was, I don't know how to describe it. Like shadow boxing, but nothing like what we do in gym class. It was fast and intense, like something out of a horror movie. Completely silent except for her breathing. When she turned toward the door, I swear I thought she was going to kill me with that look." Bridget laughed nervously. "So Paint Girl works out. Who cares?" "It wasn't just working out," Rachel insisted. "It was like she knew exactly how to hurt someone. Badly." Veronica dismissed Rachel's concerns outwardly, but the description added to her growing unease. First Madison's story, now this. Something wasn't adding up about the quiet scholarship student they'd tormented for years. In history class the next day, Mr. Peterson was discussing psychological warfare throughout the centuries. Sun Tzu believed that the supreme art of war was to subdue the enemy without fighting, he explained. Psychological warfare is often more effective than physical confrontation. Can anyone give me an example from more recent history? The classroom remained silent. Mr. Peterson sighed, accustomed to the apathy of Wellington students when it came to actual learning instead of social posturing. To everyone's surprise, Amira raised her hand. It was the first time anyone could remember her voluntarily participating in class. "Yes, Amira?" Mr. Peterson said, unable to hide his surprise. "The most effective psychological warfare creates fear through reputation alone," Amira said, her voice clear and confident. Nothing like the hesitant whisper she'd used in her presentations before. During the Cold War, both superpowers cultivated an aura of unpredictability. When your enemy believes you're capable of anything, they defeat themselves with their own imagination. The classroom fell into stunned silence. Amira's answer wasn't just correct. It was articulate and insightful, delivered with the confidence of someone who had studied the topic extensively. "That's exactly right," Mr. Peterson said, clearly impressed. "Very well put." As class continued, Veronica watched Amira with growing suspicion. The girl who had stumbled through presentations was suddenly offering perfect answers about warfare strategy. It didn't make sense. By the end of the week, Wellington was buzzing with whispers about Amira. Some claimed they'd had nightmares about her after the Jason incident. Others swore they'd seen her practicing martial arts moves that looked professional, level. A particularly dramatic sophomore insisted that Amira had stared at her for so long in the hallway that she'd felt physically ill afterward. Madison was the first to break away from Veronica's inner circle. After 3 years of unwavering loyalty, she simply stopped sitting at their lunch table, offering vague excuses about needing to study. The reality was transparent to everyone. Madison was afraid, and her fear of Amira had grown stronger than her fear of Veronica's social retribution. "This is ridiculous," Veronica fumed after Madison declined yet another invitation to hang out after school. "She's letting that nobody get to her." "I heard something yesterday," Bridget said hesitantly. "A rumor going around the junior class. Apparently, Amira was kicked out of her last school for putting someone in the hospital." "That's absurd," Veronica scoffed. "We would have heard about that." "Would we, though?" Bridget countered. "The school keeps scholarship students' records. Pretty private. What if there's something in her past they're covering up?" The seed of doubt was planted, growing larger as more students reported strange encounters with Amira. She never threatened anyone directly, never initiated confrontation. She simply existed differently now, her presence creating a ripple effect through Wellington's carefully maintained social hierarchy. During lunch period on Thursday, Veronica decided she'd had enough. She approached Amira's solitary table, determined to reassert her dominance. "So, Paint Girl," she said loudly, ensuring others would hear. "Enjoying your little moment of fame? It won't last, you know." Amira looked up slowly, setting down her fork with deliberate care. The cafeteria quieted as students turned to watch the confrontation. "Is there something you want, Veronica?" Amira asked, her voice calm and steady. "I want you to stop whatever game you're playing," Veronica snapped. "The creepy staring, the weird rumors, it's pathetic." "There's no game," Amira replied. "I'm simply done pretending." "Pretending what? That you're not a freak?" Veronica laughed, but the sound was hollow, lacking her usual confidence. Amira studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with unexpected eloquence, she said, "You know, Veronica, your entire identity is built on making others feel small. But what happens when those people stop shrinking? What happens when they stand at their full height? Who are you then?" The question hung in the air, simple, yet devastating. Several students shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Veronica's gaze. "You don't know anything about me," Veronica hissed, aware that she was losing control of the narrative. Amira smiled slightly. The first time many had seen such an expression on her face. "I know enough." That evening, the remaining members of Veronica's inner circle gathered at her house for an emergency strategy session. Madison's absence was conspicuous. "This has gone too far," Veronica declared. "She's turning the school against us with these mind games. We need to handle this." "How?" Bridget asked. "If the rumors are true, they're not," Veronica interrupted. "She's just a scholarship kid who got lucky once. We need to remind everyone who really runs Wellington." Beneath her bravado, however, Veronica felt a growing uncertainty. The dynamics of power she'd understood since freshman year were shifting beneath her feet, and for the first time, she couldn't predict the outcome. As the meeting concluded, Bridget pulled Veronica aside. "Have you heard from Madison? She's not returning my texts." "She'll come around," Veronica said dismissively. "Once we put Paint Girl back in her place, everything will go back to normal." But when she checked her phone later that night, she found a text from Madison that chilled her blood. "I'm out, V. Whatever you're planning, leave me out of it. You don't know what you're dealing with." Veronica stared at the message, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Madison had never defied her before. If she was truly this frightened, maybe there was something to the rumors after all. The next morning, Veronica arrived at school with a plan already in motion. She'd spread a carefully crafted rumor that Amira had threatened her after school. Nothing specific enough to be disproven, but serious enough to get the administration's attention. By second period, she'd been called to the principal's office to discuss the incident. She put on her best concerned face as she described feeling unsafe around Amira. "She's been staring at me strangely, following me between classes," Veronica explained to Principal Harrington, a man who had always been sympathetic to the concerns of Wellington's wealthiest families. "Yesterday she told me to watch my back." "I'm scared, Mr. Harrington," the principal nodded gravely. "I'll speak with Miss Johnson immediately. We take threats very seriously at Wellington, as you know." Veronica left his office with a satisfied smile. Let Amira try to explain her way out of this one. But by lunch, her satisfaction had turned to confusion. Amira sat at her usual table, apparently undisturbed by any administrative intervention. When Veronica walked by, Amira looked up and held her gaze with unsettling calm, not the expression of someone who'd been reprimanded. After school, Veronica intercepted Mr. Harrington in the parking lot. "Did you speak with Amira?" she asked. The principal looked uncomfortable. "I did, yes. She denied making any threats, and frankly, Miss Taylor, her disciplinary record is spotless, without any witnesses to corroborate your claim." "So you're calling me a liar?" Veronica demanded, unused to having her word questioned. "Of course not," he backpedaled quickly. "But we need more than one person's account before taking action. Perhaps if there were witnesses, or if this behavior continues." Veronica stormed away, furious, and though she wouldn't admit it, increasingly frightened. Her usual tactics weren't working. Worse, for the first time in her tenure at Wellington, the administration hadn't immediately taken her side. As she reached her car, she found a small note tucked under the windshield wiper. The handwriting was now familiar, precise, almost mechanical. "Do you feel small yet?" Veronica crumpled the note, looking around wildly, but the parking lot revealed only departing students and staff. Somehow Amira had known about her meeting with the principal. Somehow she'd anticipated this move. That night, unable to sleep, Veronica began researching Amira Johnson online. There had to be something, some record, some social media trace that would explain the sudden transformation from victim to threat. Most searches yielded nothing. But eventually, she found an old article about junior martial arts competitions from 7 years ago. The photo quality was poor, but there was no mistaking the girl holding a trophy, a younger Amira, standing beside a stern-looking older man. The caption read, "Amira Johnson takes first place in the under-14 division, continuing her family's legacy in competitive martial arts. Coach and grandfather William Johnson previously trained her mother, Sarah Johnson, to 3 national championships before her retirement." Veronica stared at the image, a cold realization dawning. They hadn't been bullying some random scholarship student. They'd been tormenting someone who'd been trained to fight since childhood. Hands shaking, she dug deeper, finding sparse but telling information. William Johnson had been a legendary figure in underground fighting circuits before becoming a trainer. Sarah Johnson had dominated women's competitions for years before disappearing from the scene abruptly. There was no mention of Amira in competitions. After age 13, as if she'd suddenly stopped competing right around the time she would have transferred to Wellington. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Veronica sat back, her heart racing. The quiet, awkward girl they'd tormented hadn't been weak. She'd been hiding. And now, after the paint incident, she wasn't hiding anymore. Sleep eluded Veronica that night, as a terrifying question repeated in her mind. What happens when someone trained to fight decides they're done being a victim? Veronica arrived at school the next day with dark circles under her eyes, poorly concealed by makeup. Her research into Amira's background had left her shaken, but she was determined not to show weakness. She needed to regain control of the situation and of Wellington Academy. First, she needed to isolate Amira again. The easiest way was to make her a target for the school administration, keeping her under constant scrutiny. "There's something you should know," Veronica told her English teacher before class. "I've been hearing some disturbing things about Amira Johnson. Some students are saying she's been threatening people." Mrs. Bennett frowned. "That doesn't sound like Amira." "People change," Veronica said with practiced concern. "I'm just worried, that's all." She repeated variations of this conversation with 3 other teachers throughout the morning. By lunch, she noticed several faculty members watching Amira more closely. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a way to make Amira feel the pressure of institutional suspicion. Veronica's next move was more direct. She sent a text to Ryan, a senior whose father owned a security company and who occasionally helped Veronica with her more complex schemes. Need to talk to Paint Girl alone. Can you help? His reply came quickly. The old equipment room behind the gym, 3:30. I'll bring backup. Veronica smiled, feeling more like herself again. This was familiar territory, setting up situations where the odds were stacked in her favor. Even if Amira had some fighting skills, she wouldn't expect an ambush, and she certainly couldn't take on multiple opponents at once. When the final bell rang, Veronica watched from a distance as Ryan approached Amira in the hallway. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Amira nod after a moment and follow him toward the back of the school. Perfect. Veronica waited 10 minutes before heading to the same location. The equipment room behind the gym was rarely used, a storage space for broken or outdated athletic gear that hadn't been properly disposed of. It was isolated enough that any confrontation would go unnoticed by faculty. As she approached, Veronica felt a surge of confidence. Ryan had brought 2 other seniors, both football players with impressive builds. They stood in a loose semicircle with Amira facing them, her back to the wall. Thanks for coming, Veronica said, stepping into view. I thought we should have a proper conversation. Amira looked at her, then at the 3 boys surrounding her. If she was intimidated, she didn't show it. 4 against 1, she observed calmly. Is that what passes for fair at Wellington? This isn't about fair, Veronica replied. It's about putting you back in your place. Ryan moved forward, reaching for Amira's arm. Just listen to what Veronica has to say, and no one gets hurt. What happened next occurred so quickly that Veronica would later struggle to describe it. As Ryan's hand neared Amira's arm, she shifted, a subtle movement that somehow redirected his momentum. Ryan staggered forward, off balance, as Amira sidestepped, with fluid grace. The second boy rushed in, swinging wildly. Amira ducked beneath his arm, her palm striking upward into his solar plexus with controlled force. He dropped to his knees, gasping. The third attacker hesitated, witnessing his friend's failures. That moment of hesitation was all Amira needed. She moved toward him with terrifying precision, her strikes targeted and efficient. Within seconds, he joined his friends on the ground. Clutching his side where she delivered a precise blow, Ryan struggled back to his feet, fury replacing his earlier confidence. He charged at Amira like a bull, all technique abandoned in rage. She met his charge with calculated calm, using his own weight and momentum against him. There was a sickening sound as her elbow connected with his shoulder, and Ryan cried out, dropping to the ground. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. Veronica stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. This wasn't luck or a single lucky strike like with Jason. This was systematic, trained precision. The movements of someone who had spent years learning exactly how to dismantle opponents. Amira turned to face her, not even breathing hard. The 3 boys remained on the ground, groaning in pain but with no visible injuries. She had been careful not to leave marks. Is this what you wanted to see? Amira asked, her voice unnervingly quiet. Veronica backed away, genuine fear coursing through her for perhaps the first time in her life. Stay away from me, she warned, though the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. Amira approached slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. When she was close enough that only Veronica could hear, she leaned in and whispered, "Do you feel small yet?" The same words from the note on her car. Veronica felt her blood run cold. "You're crazy," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "No," Amira replied. "I'm just done pretending." She turned and walked away, leaving Veronica with the 3 defeated boys. News of the incident spread through Wellington like wildfire, though the details became increasingly distorted with each retelling. Some claimed Amira had put all 3 boys in the hospital. Others insisted she'd used martial arts moves so advanced they couldn't be legal. The truth, that she had neutralized 3 larger opponents without causing serious injury, was somehow more frightening than the exaggerations. The following day, Veronica arrived at school to find her carefully constructed social world crumbling. Students who had always yielded to her in the hallways now watched her with curious eyes, sensing the shift in power. During her government class presentation, someone in the back row whispered loudly, "Did you hear what happened to Ryan?" The class tittered. And for the first time, Veronica felt the sting of being the subject of mockery rather than its orchestrator. Lunch was worse. Her usual table, once the center of Wellington's social universe, was half empty. Madison was still, absent, and now Bridget sat with a different group laughing nervously when Veronica caught her eye. Only 2 freshman girls remained, their continued loyalty based more on fear than respect. Across the cafeteria, Amira sat alone as always, but the atmosphere around her had changed. Students glanced her way with a new awareness, not friendship or admiration, but a wary respect that bordered on fear. In U.S. history, Mr. Peterson discussed military tactics, focusing on asymmetrical warfare. Sometimes, the perceived weaker opponent has advantages the stronger force doesn't anticipate, he explained. Veronica felt certain the lesson was directed at her, though Mr. Peterson never looked her way. The examples he chose, of smaller forces, outmaneuvering larger ones through superior strategy, seemed pointed, deliberate. After class, she confronted him in the empty classroom. "Is this supposed to be funny?" she demanded. "Using your lesson to mock me?" Mr. Peterson looked genuinely confused. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Miss Taylor. This material has been on the syllabus since September." "Everyone's talking." "About what happened yesterday," she pressed. "Ah," he nodded, understanding dawning. "The alleged incident with Miss Johnson. I heard rumors, yes. But my lesson plan wasn't commentary on current events." He paused, studying her with sudden interest. "Though it's telling that you interpreted it that way." Veronica left the classroom seething. Even the teachers seemed to be turning against her. The carefully constructed social order she'd maintained for years was unraveling, and she felt powerless to stop it. That afternoon, she overheard 2 juniors discussing Amira in the bathroom. "My cousin goes to Westlake Prep and she says Amira's family is like, connected," one girl whispered. "Her grandfather trained professional fighters or something." "I heard she got kicked out of her last school for putting someone in the hospital," the other replied. "The school covered it up because she's like some kind of prodigy." Veronica listened, realizing the rumors she'd discovered in her research were now spreading organically. Wellington thrived on gossip, and Amira's sudden transformation from victim to threat was the most interesting development in years. By the end of the week, Madison had officially left Veronica's inner circle, declining all invitations and avoiding eye contact in the halls. When Veronica finally cornered her before chemistry class, Madison's fear was palpable. "I can't do this anymore," Madison said, her voice low and urgent. "You didn't see what she did to Ryan and those guys. It wasn't normal, V. So you're just abandoning me?" Veronica hissed. "After everything we've been through?" Madison looked at her with unexpected pity. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about popularity anymore. That girl is dangerous, and you've made yourself her target." As Madison walked away, Veronica felt a growing desperation. For the first time in her high school career, she was losing control, not just of her friends or her social standing, but of the entire narrative. Students who had once feared her now whispered about Amira instead. Teachers who had overlooked her bullying now watched her with suspicion. In a final desperate attempt to regain control, Veronica decided to do what she did best: find someone's weakness and exploit it. If she couldn't intimidate Amira physically, she would destroy her another way. That evening, she sat at her computer, searching deeper into Amira's family history. The scattered information about martial arts competitions wasn't enough. She needed something more damaging, something that would turn the school against Amira once and for all. Hours of searching yielded little until she found an obscure forum dedicated to underground fighting circuits. A post from 8 years ago mentioned, "William Johnson, Amira's grandfather, in connection with a series of high-stakes matches. Further digging revealed whispers about Sarah Johnson, Amira's mother, and her reputation for brutality in the ring. Then, buried in an archived news site, Veronica found what she was looking for: a brief report about the deaths of Sarah Johnson and her husband Daniel. The details were vague, an incident related to their professional activities, but reading between the lines, Veronica realized with growing horror that Amira's parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been assassins, professional fighters, who had crossed the line into something darker. And Amira's grandfather, the man who had trained them both, was apparently a legend in these same circles. Veronica sat back, her heart racing. This wasn't just about a girl who could fight back against bullies. She had inadvertently targeted the heir to a fighting legacy that bordered on the criminal. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had made an enemy of someone trained by the best, someone who came from a family where violence wasn't just a skill, but a way of life. For the first time, Veronica felt true terror. She looked across the hallway the next day and saw Amira watching her, those dark eyes calculating and patient. In that moment, Veronica understood that she had never been the predator in this relationship. She had always been the prey. Morning sunlight streamed through Veronica's bedroom windows, but she hadn't slept. Her laptop screen still displayed the articles she'd found about Amira's family, fragments of a history far more dangerous than she'd imagined. The realization that she'd spent years tormenting someone with such a background left her stomach in knots. For the first time in her life, Veronica Taylor felt truly afraid. But beneath that fear burned something else, a desperate, cornered rage. She'd spent too long as Wellington's queen to surrender her crown without a fight. If she couldn't beat Amira with physical force, she would destroy her another way. "If I can't beat her, I'll destroy her life instead," she whispered to her reflection as she applied concealer to the dark circles under her eyes. Her father, Richard Taylor, was on his third cup of coffee when she entered the kitchen, his attention divided between his phone and a stack of financial reports. "Dad," Veronica said carefully, "do you still have connections with that private investigator? The one who helped when that employee was stealing from the company?" Richard looked up, his interest piqued. "Harvey, sure, why?" "There's this scholarship student at school," Veronica explained, choosing her words carefully. "Something seems off about her family. I'm concerned about safety issues." Her father studied her face. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the incident I heard about, some kind of fight behind the gym?" Veronica feigned surprise. "You heard about that? I'm on the board of trustees, Veronica. Not much happens at Wellington that I don't hear about eventually." He set down his phone. "Is this girl causing you trouble?" "It's not that," Veronica lied smoothly. "I'm worried about the school." "What? If her family has a criminal background, shouldn't someone look into that?" Richard considered this, then nodded. "I'll give Harvey a call." "What's the girl's name?" "Amira Johnson. She lives with her grandfather, William Johnson." By that afternoon, Harvey Blackwood had been hired to investigate Amira's family history. Veronica felt a surge of vindication as she headed to school. Let Amira play her mind games. Soon, Veronica would have ammunition that no amount of fighting skill could defend against. At Wellington, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Students moved differently in the hallways, their attention constantly drawn to two focal points: Veronica, whose power was visibly waning, and Amira, whose quiet presence now commanded a fearful respect. Veronica spent her morning classes crafting the perfect rumor, something believable enough to spread quickly, but damaging enough to isolate Amira completely. By lunch, she had begun whispering to carefully selected students. "Did you know Amira's family has a criminal record?" she murmured, to Ashley, a notorious gossip. "My dad's on the board and they're doing a background check because of safety concerns." "What kind of criminal record?" Ashley asked, eyes wide. Veronica leaned closer. "I shouldn't say too much, but think violent crimes, like really violent. There's a reason she knows how to fight like that." By sixth period, variations of the rumor had circulated throughout Wellington's student body. Some versions claimed Amira's grandfather had been in prison. Others suggested her parents had died during some kind of criminal activity. The common thread in every version was the implication that Amira herself might be dangerous, not just capable of defending herself, but potentially violent without provocation. The effect was immediate and powerful. Students who had begun to admire Amira's stand against bullying now eyed her with suspicion and fear. The respect she'd earned transformed into something darker, a wary distance that bordered on panic. Veronica watched with satisfaction as people physically moved away when Amira entered the cafeteria. She might have lost her battle for social dominance, but she was winning the war for Wellington's perception. Better to be a fallen queen than to let her rival rise unopposed. That evening, Harvey Blackwood called with his preliminary findings. "The grandfather's interesting," he told Richard Taylor while Veronica listened on speaker. "Former military, then spent decades in competitive martial arts circuits. Some of those circuits weren't exactly sanctioned." "And the parents?" Richard asked. "That's where it gets murky," Harvey replied. "Sarah and Daniel Johnson died 7 years ago. Official record says car accident, but there are inconsistencies in the police report. They traveled extensively, particularly to countries known for private security contracting. Reading between the lines, they might have been involved in work that governments prefer to keep off the books." "Mercenaries?" Richard suggested. "Or something similar," Harvey agreed. "Nothing concrete enough to take to authorities, but definitely the kind of background that raises questions about the granddaughter." After the call ended, Richard turned to Veronica with concern. "I think I should bring this to the principal's attention." "Definitely," Veronica agreed, trying to hide her triumph. "The school has a responsibility to keep students safe." The next morning, Principal Harrington called an emergency faculty meeting before classes. Veronica, arriving early to work on a student council project, positioned herself near the conference room door, where she could overhear fragments of the discussion inside. Concerning background, potential safety risk, monitoring the situation. A smile spread across Veronica's face. The seeds she'd planted were taking root. By the time classes began, she noticed teachers watching Amira with new wariness. During chemistry, Mr. Wells called on her less frequently and maintained a noticeable distance from her desk. In English, Mrs. Bennett's formerly warm demeanor had cooled to professional politeness. The whispers among students grew louder, more speculative. By lunchtime, a group of parents had called the administration, concerned about their children's safety. The rumor had spread beyond Wellington's walls, gaining the momentum that only parental panic could provide. Amira walked through it all with the same calm precision she'd shown since the paint incident, but Veronica noticed the subtle tightening around her eyes, the fractional increase in tension in her shoulders. The psychological warfare was working. Even a trained fighter couldn't remain completely immune to becoming a pariah. During 7th period math, Veronica received a text from Madison, the first communication since she'd left the inner circle. "Teddy, have you done? These rumors about Amira are insane," Veronica texted back. "I haven't done anything. People are just finally seeing the truth." Madison's reply came quickly. "This isn't about popularity anymore. You're trying to get her expelled. This is too far, even for you." "She brought this on herself," Veronica responded, then silenced her phone. After the final bell, Madison approached Amira in the hallway. Veronica watched from a distance, unable to hear their conversation, but noting Madison's apologetic expression and Amira's measured response. The interaction ended with Madison handing Amira a folded piece of paper before walking away. That evening, Veronica received an unexpected call from her father. "The school's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow," he informed her, his voice unusually serious. "Apparently there's concern about increasing tensions between certain students. Principal Harrington mentioned your name specifically." "My die." "Name?" Veronica feigned innocence. "Why would he mention me? He seems to think you're involved in spreading rumors about the Johnson girl." Richard's tone hardened. "Veronica, if you've been manipulating this situation, I'm just concerned for school safety," she insisted. "Everyone deserves to know who they're dealing with." There's a line between legitimate concern and character assassination, her father warned. Make sure you haven't crossed it. After hanging up, Veronica paced her room anxiously. The situation was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. If the board got involved, there would be investigations, questions about who started the rumors. She needed to accelerate her plan, to force Amira into revealing her true nature before anyone could question Veronica's motives. A desperate plan formed in her mind. If Amira truly came from a family of fighters, perhaps even criminals, then she would have a breaking point, a line that, when crossed, would make her snap. All Veronica needed to do was find that line and push Amira across it, preferably in front of witnesses. The next day, tension hung over Wellington like a storm cloud. Teachers spoke in hushed tones, students traveled in groups, and security personnel were noticeably more present in the hallways. The administration had clearly decided that Amira represented a potential threat, though they hadn't taken any official action yet. Veronica had arranged for the perfect setup, a public confrontation during the assembly scheduled that afternoon. The entire school would witness Amira's reaction, and Veronica had ensured that several of her remaining loyal followers would provoke the situation if necessary. What Veronica hadn't anticipated was Bridget's crisis of conscience. During lunch, her former friend approached her in the bathroom, expression troubled. "This has gone too far," Bridget said quietly. "The things people are saying about Amira, they're not just mean anymore. They're dangerous." "She is dangerous," Veronica snapped. "Or have you forgotten what she did to Ryan and the others?" "She defended herself against 3 guys who were trying to intimidate her," Bridget countered. "That doesn't make her family criminals." "You don't know what I know," Veronica insisted. "Maybe not," Bridget admitted. "But I know what you're planning for the assembly, and I can't be part of it." She hesitated, then added, "Neither can most of the others. They're scared of what might happen." "So now you're all abandoning me?" Veronica's voice rose dangerously. "After everything I've done for you?" "What have you actually done for any of us, Veronica?" Bridget asked quietly. "Made us feel temporarily important by association? Taught us to be cruel to stay in your good graces?" She shook her head. "I'm done. And if you go through with this plan, I'll tell Principal Harrington exactly who's been spreading those rumors." As Bridget left, Veronica felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling. She leaned against the sink, breathing heavily, panic rising in her chest. Everything was falling apart. Her social power, her reputation, her future, all threatened because of one scholarship student who refused to stay in her place. When the assembly bell rang, Veronica had made a new decision. If her followers wouldn't help her expose Amira, she would do it herself. One final, desperate gambit to reclaim what she was losing. The auditorium filled quickly, students filing into rows as Principal Harrington prepared to address concerns about recent events on campus. Veronica spotted Amira sitting alone near the back, maintaining the same composed posture she'd shown throughout the escalating chaos. Before the principal could begin speaking, Bridget approached the stage asking to address the student body. Harrington, surprised but willing to promote student voice, agreed. "I have something important to say," Bridget announced, her voice shaking slightly. "There have been rumors circulating about Amira Johnson and her family. I want everyone to know that these rumors were deliberately started by Veronica Taylor after Amira defended herself against bullying." A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. All eyes turned to Veronica, who sat frozen in shock. This wasn't part of her plan. This was betrayal on a public scale. "For years, Veronica has targeted Amira," Bridget continued, gaining confidence. "The paint incident at the party was just one example. When Amira finally stood up for herself, Veronica couldn't handle losing control, so she started spreading lies to turn everyone against Amira." Principal Harrington stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation, but the damage was done. Students were whispering, pointing, some even standing to get a better view of Veronica's reaction. In that moment, something inside Veronica snapped. Years of maintaining perfect control, of carefully crafting her image, of manipulating others for her benefit, all undone in seconds by a former friend's confession. She stood abruptly, marching toward the stage. "You want to talk about truth?" she shouted, pushing past Harrington to grab the microphone. "Let's talk about Amira Johnson, the girl you're all suddenly defending. Did you know her family has a history of violence? That her parents were probably killers? That she's been trained to fight since she could walk?" The auditorium fell silent, stunned by the outburst. "She's been playing all of you," Veronica continued, her voice rising hysterically, "acting weak and pathetic while hiding what she really is. Ask her. Ask her what her grandfather taught her in that basement every night." Security personnel moved toward the stage, but Veronica was beyond caring. She jumped down, pushing through, the crowd toward where Amira sat, still calm, still watching with those unnervingly steady eyes. "Tell them," Veronica demanded, standing before Amira. "Tell them who you really are." When Amira didn't respond, something in Veronica broke completely. With a cry of frustration, she lunged forward, hands reaching for Amira's throat, an action so shocking, so out of character for Wellington's calculated queen, that the entire assembly seemed to freeze in disbelief. The previous night, while Veronica had been planning her final attempt to destroy Amira's reputation, Amira had been in the basement of her home with her grandfather. The rumors circulating about her family hadn't escaped William Johnson's notice, nor had the increasing isolation his granddaughter faced at school. "They're digging into our past," Amira had said quietly, practicing a complex sequence of movements, with fluid precision. Her grandfather watched from the side of the training mat, his expression serious. "This was inevitable the moment you stopped hiding your abilities." "I know," Amira acknowledged, completing the sequence without a single wasted motion. William rose from his chair, his movements belying his age as he stepped onto the mat. "Tomorrow, they will try to break you, either physically or by turning the school completely against you." "Veronica's already done that with the rumors," Amira replied. "No," her grandfather countered. "What she's done is create fear. Fear without respect is dangerous. It makes people unpredictable." He moved to the center of the mat. "Show me your defensive sequence." For an hour they trained together, grandfather and granddaughter moving through increasingly complex patterns. Finally, William stopped, studying Amira with evaluating eyes. "No more holding back," he said firmly. "When the moment comes, and it will come soon, you must show them exactly who you are, not to hurt, but to end this definitively." He demonstrated one final technique, a sequence designed not to injure but to completely neutralize an opponent. The movements were precise, almost beautiful in their efficiency. "This is not for the training mat," he explained. "This is the finishing move that ends fights in seconds." Amira practiced it repeatedly until her muscles memorized the pattern. By the time she went to bed, her body knew exactly what to do when the moment arrived. Now, as Veronica lunged toward her in front of the entire school, Amira felt a strange sense of calm. Time seemed to slow as her training took over, her body responding without conscious thought. She rose from her seat in one fluid motion, sidestepping Veronica's wild lunge with millimeters to spare. As Veronica stumbled forward, Amira's hands moved with precision, redirecting rather than stopping her momentum. The assembled students and faculty watched in stunned silence as Amira systematically dismantled Veronica's attack. There was no wild brawl, no exchange of blows. Just Amira's controlled movements contrasted against Veronica's increasingly desperate attempts to land a single hit. "Stay still and fight me," Veronica screamed, her composure completely gone. Amira said nothing, continuing her defensive pattern, never striking back but making Veronica's every move look clumsy and ineffective. The contrast was stark. Veronica's wild aggression against Amira's disciplined control. Finally, after Veronica had exhausted herself with failed attacks, Amira executed the technique her grandfather had taught her. A precise shift of weight, a measured redirection of momentum, and suddenly Veronica found herself immobilized in a hold that applied pressure to specific points. Not painful, but completely effective. She couldn't move without causing herself discomfort. The auditorium remained in shocked silence as Amira leaned close to Veronica's ear. "You're not worth it," she said quietly, then released the hold and stepped back. Veronica collapsed to her knees, gasping, staring up at Amira with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The girl she had tormented for years could have hurt her badly, but had chosen restraint instead. Security personnel finally reached them, positioning themselves between the two girls, though it was clear to everyone that the situation was already over. Principal Harrington arrived moments later, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Miss Taylor, Miss Johnson, my office immediately," he ordered. As security escorted them from the auditorium, the assembled student body erupted in frenzied conversation. What they had witnessed defied the normal rules of high school conflict. It wasn't a fight so much as a demonstration of two completely different approaches to power. In the principal's office, Veronica sat huddled in a chair, her usual confidence shattered. Amira remained standing, her posture relaxed but alert. "Would either of you care to explain what just happened?" Harrington demanded. Before either could respond, the door opened to admit Madison, followed closely by Bridget. "We can explain," Madison said firmly. "All of it. The bullying, the paint incident, the rumors. Everything." For the next hour, the story unfolded. Years of Veronica's systematic torment, the deliberate humiliation at the party, and finally the fabricated rumors designed to isolate and potentially expel Amira. Madison and Bridget spared no details, including their own complicity in the bullying. As for Amira's family, Bridget concluded, Veronica twisted information to make them sound dangerous. Yes, they have a background in martial arts, but there's nothing criminal about that. Principal Harrington turned to Amira. "Is this true, about your family's background in martial arts?" "My grandfather is a former competitor and trainer," Amira confirmed calmly. "He taught me to defend myself, not to hurt others." "Then why hide these skills for so long?" he asked. "Because once people see you as different, they never see you." "The same way again," Amira replied, echoing her grandfather's words. Throughout the explanation, Veronica remained silent, her earlier rage replaced by a hollow resignation. When Harrington finally dismissed the others to speak with her privately, she couldn't meet his eyes. "Miss Taylor," he began, his voice grave, "given the severity of what's occurred, the bullying, the false rumors, and your physical attack today, I have no choice but to recommend suspension, pending a board review for possible expulsion." Veronica nodded numbly. "My parents," she whispered. "Yes, they've been called," Harrington confirmed. "They're on their way." Outside, as Madison and Bridget returned to class, Amira found herself alone in the hallway for the first time since the confrontation. Students passing between classes stared openly, their expressions a mixture of awe and lingering wariness. The fear remained, but it had transformed, no longer the fear of an unknown threat, but respect for demonstrated skill, and, more importantly, restraint. By the end of the day, news of Veronica's suspension had spread throughout Wellington. The social hierarchy that had defined the school for years had been upended in a single afternoon. The queen had fallen, her reign ended not by another social climber, but by someone who had never sought power in the first place. That evening, Richard and Elizabeth Taylor sat in stony silence as Veronica explained everything. Her years of bullying Amira, the paint incident, the fabricated rumors. The disappointment in her father's eyes cut deeper than any punishment the school might impose. "We raised you better than this," Elizabeth said finally, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "I know," Veronica whispered, unable to offer any justification for her actions. "You'll be transferring schools," Richard announced. "I've already spoken with Westlake Prep. They'll take you next semester, provided you complete community service and counseling." "You're making me leave Wellington?" Veronica asked, though she knew the answer. "After what you've done, do you really think you can stay?" her father asked. "You're lucky Amira's grandfather isn't pressing charges for assault." The reality of her situation hit Veronica fully then. She had lost everything. Her social standing, her school, her friends, her parents, trust, all sacrificed in a futile attempt to maintain control over someone who had never truly been under her power. Meanwhile, Amira returned home to find her grandfather waiting in his usual chair, a worn copy of The Art of War open on his lap. "It's Over, she told him simply. He studied her face. You showed restraint. You taught me that mercy is a weapon too. William nodded approvingly. And now? Now they know what I am, Amira replied. There's no going back. There never is, her grandfather agreed, setting aside his book. But forward is where we were always meant to go. The next day at Wellington, Amira experienced something entirely new, respect without fear. Students didn't flinch away when she passed, instead they nodded acknowledgement. Teachers spoke to her with a new awareness, recognizing that the quiet, intelligent student they'd always known possessed depths they hadn't imagined. Madison approached her at lunch, sliding hesitantly into the seat across from her. I owe you an apology, she began. For everything. For the years of standing by while Veronica tormented you. For the paint. For all of it. Amira regarded her silently for a moment. Why now? She asked finally. Because I was afraid before, Madison admitted. Of Veronica, then of you. Now I'm just trying to do better. She attempted a smile. Maybe we could start over. Be friends? Amira's expression remained neutral. We were never friends, she said simply, gathering her things and walking away. Some lessons couldn't be unlearned, some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Madison had made her choices, and now Amira was making hers, choosing selective solitude over false friendship. As the week progressed, Wellington Academy adjusted to its new reality. Veronica's absence created a vacuum that no single student rushed to fill, as if her downfall had revealed the hollow nature of the power she'd wielded. The rigid social hierarchy began to dissolve, replaced by something more fluid, more forgiving. Amira continued her daily routine. Classes, studying, training with her grandfather in the evenings. But she no longer hid her abilities or intelligence. When she spoke in class, she did so with confidence. When she moved through the halls, she did so with her natural grace. In her final conversation with Amira before leaving Wellington, Veronica sought something she'd never before needed. Forgiveness. I don't expect you to forget what I did, she said quietly, avoiding Amira's steady gaze. But I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Amira studied her former tormentor, noting the genuine remorse in her eyes. I believe you, she said finally. That's it? Veronica asked. You believe me? What more do you want? Amira countered. Absolution? That's not mine to give. Then what am I supposed to do? Veronica's voice cracked with vulnerability she'd never before revealed. Amira considered the question carefully, before answering. Live with your shame, she said, not unkindly. Learn from it. Become someone better. As Veronica walked away for the final time, Amira felt no triumph, no satisfaction in her enemy's defeat. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Mercy is a weapon, too. You let her live with her shame. That's worse than any punch. That evening, as they trained in the basement, William observed a new quality in his granddaughter's movements, a fluidity born of complete self-acceptance. You're no longer hiding, he noted. No, Amira agreed, executing a complex sequence with perfect form. I'm not. Good, he said simply. It's time you showed the world who you really are. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the auditorium, Wellington Academy had settled into a new normal. The hallways buzzed with the usual teenage energy, but something fundamental had shifted. The rigid social hierarchy that had defined student interactions for years had crumbled, leaving something more fluid and less cruel in its wake. Veronica Taylor's name was still mentioned in whispered conversations, but increasingly as a cautionary tale rather than with reverence. Her spectacular fall from grace had become almost mythological, the queen who pushed too far and lost everything. For Veronica herself, reality proved far harsher than rumors. The morning of her first day at Westlake Prep found her standing before a different school entrance wearing a different uniform, facing a student body that had already heard versions of her story. New schools had little tolerance for disgraced transfers, regardless of their former status. Remember, her father said as he dropped her off, his voice still carrying the edge of disappointment that hadn't softened since the board hearing. "You're there to learn and improve, not to repeat past mistakes." Veronica nodded silently. The confident, composed girl who had once ruled Wellington was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't meet her parents' eyes at breakfast. Her introduction to Westlake brought a painful reversal of everything she'd known. Students watched her, with undisguised curiosity but no deference. Teachers regarded her with professional courtesy, tinged with wariness. When she entered the cafeteria at lunch, no one rushed to offer her a seat at their table. That evening, she sat alone in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. "This is temporary," she told herself. "I'll rebuild. I'll make them forget what happened." But her phone remained silent. Her former friends from Wellington had moved on, finding new social arrangements in her absence. Madison and Bridget had posted photos together at a coffee shop, studying for midterms. Even her so-called friends at Westlake, girls she'd known from summer programs and family connections, maintained a polite distance. "They'll come around," she whispered, though the confidence in her voice rang hollow. At Wellington, Amira moved through her days with a new freedom. No longer hunching her shoulders or averting her gaze, she walked with natural grace, her intelligence and composure no longer concealed. The transformation fascinated her classmates, who couldn't quite reconcile the quiet scholarship student they'd ignored with the poised young woman now in their midst. Most students maintained a respectful distance, unsure how to approach someone they'd either tormented or silently allowed to be tormented. Amira seemed content with this arrangement, focusing on her studies with renewed dedication. In class discussions, she now participated freely, her insights often profound enough to leave even teachers momentarily speechless. "Miss Johnson," Mr. Peterson said after a particularly insightful comment on military strategy, "you should consider pursuing international relations in college. Your understanding of power dynamics is exceptional." Amira nodded her thanks, no longer uncomfortable with praise. "I've had some unique experiences with power dynamics," she replied, earning nervous laughter from her classmates. The rumors about her family background persisted, but had transformed. Rather than frightening, they now seemed fascinating, the stuff of action movies rather than horror films. Younger students watched her pass in the hallways with undisguised awe, creating their own exaggerated stories about her abilities. Madison made continued attempts to establish a friendship, approaching Amira with careful overtures. Notes of apology appeared in Amira's locker. An extra coffee materialized on her desk before first period. Each gesture was acknowledged with polite nods but no reciprocation. "She'll never forgive us, will she?" Madison asked Bridget as they watched Amira reading alone during lunch. "Would you?" Bridget countered. "After everything we did?" Madison had no answer for that. At home, Veronica faced even greater challenges. Her parents' disappointment manifested in different ways. Her mother's tears during family dinner, her father's heavy sighs when he thought she couldn't hear. The family's social calendar, once filled with events where the Taylors had been honored guests, grew conspicuously empty. "The Andersons' charity gala is this weekend," Elizabeth Taylor mentioned casually over breakfast, studiously avoiding her daughter's gaze. "Your father and I thought it best if we declined this year." Veronica understood the unspoken meaning. Her presence would create discomfort, would remind everyone of her disgrace. She had become a liability to her family's social standing, the very currency she had once leveraged so effectively at school. "It's fine," she said quietly. "I have studying to do anyway." Her father looked up from his newspaper, an unfamiliar softness crossing his features. "This isn't forever, Veronica. People forget, given time." "Do they?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Or do they just find someone else to talk about?" Richard Taylor had no answer for his daughter. The harsh lessons of social dynamics she'd once wielded against others were now being applied to her with equal cruelty. The weekend brought a desperate attempt to salvage some connection to her former life. Veronica texted several former followers, who had remained neutral during her downfall, suggesting coffee at the mall. The responses ranged from transparent excuses to outright silence. Only one girl, Caitlin, a sophomore who had once desperately sought Veronica's approval, agreed to meet. Their conversation was stilted, uncomfortable. Caitlin spoke of Wellington as if Veronica was a distant alumna rather than someone who had left mere weeks ago. Everything's so different now, Caitlin explained, picking at her muffin. People just hang out with whoever they want. It's weird. Different how? Veronica pressed, hungry for details of the world she'd left behind. Caitlin shrugged. I don't know. Like, Lauren Pierce is friends with Noah Turner now, even though he's on scholarship. And nobody cares. The implications were clear. Veronica's carefully constructed social barriers had collapsed in her absence. The strict hierarchy she'd enforced was dissolving, allowing connections based on genuine interest rather than perceived status. And Amira? Veronica couldn't help asking. What? About her? Caitlin hesitated, searching for the right words. People respect her, I guess, but she doesn't really hang out with anyone. She just does her own thing. She leaned forward conspiratorially. There's a rumor that colleges are already recruiting her, like actual Ivy Leagues, for some special leadership program. The information stung more than Veronica expected. She had spent years crafting the perfect college application profile. Student council president, charity work, summer internships at her father's company. Yet Amira, who had spent those same years in self-imposed obscurity, was now being courted by prestigious universities. I should go, Veronica said abruptly, gathering her things. Thanks for meeting me. Caitlin looked relieved. Sure, maybe we can do it again sometime. Both knew they wouldn't. As the semester progressed, Veronica found herself adrift at Westlake. Her attempts to establish a new social foundation faltered. Students there had their own established dynamics, and her reputation preceded her. The mandatory counseling sessions required by the school board forced uncomfortable self-reflection. Why do you think you targeted Amira specifically? Her counselor asked during one session. I don't know, Veronica answered automatically, then paused, confronting the question honestly for the first time. She was different. Quiet. Smart, but never showing it. It was like she was hiding something, and that bothered me. Does it bother you when people keep parts of themselves private? The question lingered with Veronica long after the session ended. What had really driven her relentless campaign against Amira? Was it simply the easy target she had presented, or something deeper? A fundamental discomfort with someone who existed outside the carefully controlled social world Veronica had created? In a moment of impulsive desperation, Veronica drove to Wellington one afternoon, parking across the street as school let out. She watched students stream through the doors, immediately noticing the changed dynamics. Groups were more fluid, less rigidly defined by social status. Laughter seemed more genuine, less performative. Then Amira emerged, walking alone but with confident purpose. She had changed her hairstyle, letting her natural curls frame her face instead of pulling them back. She wore no glasses now, and her uniform, while still regulation, fit properly instead of hanging loosely as it once had. The transformation was subtle but profound. This was someone comfortable in her own skin. Veronica sank lower in her seat, not wanting to be seen. As Amira reached the bottom of the steps, Madison approached her, saying something Veronica couldn't hear. Amira shook her head firmly, her expression resolute as she continued walking. Madison's shoulders slumped in defeat as she watched Amira. The scene crystallized something for Veronica. Amira's power had never come from social manipulation or cruelty. It came from something deeper, more fundamental. The strength Veronica had spent years trying to build through controlling others, Amira possessed naturally through knowing herself. That evening, in a final, desperate attempt to make sense of her situation, Veronica drove to Amira's neighborhood. She sat in her car outside the modest two-story house for nearly an hour, gathering courage for an encounter she hadn't planned but suddenly felt necessary. When she finally approached the door and knocked, Amira's grandfather answered, his expression neutral as he recognized her. "Is Amira home?" Veronica asked, her voice smaller than she intended. William Johnson studied her for a long moment before stepping aside. In the living room, Veronica found Amira reading in an armchair, a cup of tea on the table beside her. She looked up, surprise. briefly crossing her features before her expression returned to careful neutrality. "Veronica," she acknowledged. "Why are you here?" The question was direct, without hostility but offering no warmth either. Veronica found herself struggling for words, the carefully rehearsed speech evaporating from her mind. "I don't know," she admitted finally. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" "How you're okay," Veronica said, the words tumbling out. "How you went through years of what I did to you, and you're just fine, better than fine. While I'm—" She gestured helplessly at herself. Amira set her book aside, considering the question. "I was never defined by how you saw me," she said finally. "That was your mistake." "And what was yours?" Veronica asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Hiding who I really was," Amira replied without hesitation, "letting fear of others' reactions control my choices." They regarded each other in silence, former victim and tormentor separated by a chasm of experience that no conversation could bridge. William Johnson appeared in the doorway, his presence a silent reminder that this meeting had limits. "I should go," Veronica said. Amira nodded. "Probably. Will you ever forgive me?" The question escaped before Veronica could stop it. Amira's expression remained steady, but something softened in her eyes. "That's not what you're really asking for." "What am I asking for, then?" "You want me to make your shame go away," Amira said quietly. "I can't do that. Only you can." As Veronica turned to leave, William Johnson spoke for the first time. "The hardest fights," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "are the ones we have with ourselves." Veronica nodded, understanding the truth in his words, even as they offered no comfort. In her car, she sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel, tears finally coming after weeks of emotional numbness. Something had broken inside her, not just her social standing or her confidence, but the fundamental way she understood herself and her place in the world. That night, for the first time since her downfall, she slept without nightmares. In the months following Veronica's departure, Wellington Academy settled into its new social patterns. Without the enforced hierarchy that had defined student interactions for years, genuine connections began to form across previously rigid boundaries. Scholarship students sat with legacy families. Athletes mingled with debate team members. The invisible walls that had separated different social groups became permeable, then barely noticeable. Through it all, Amira maintained her independence. She was no longer ignored. Students acknowledged her in hallways, teachers sought her contributions in class, but she remained largely solitary by choice. "Aren't you lonely?" Madison asked her once during a shared lab assignment. Amira considered the question seriously. "There's a difference between being alone and being lonely," she replied. "I'm comfortable with myself." The answer puzzled Madison, who had scrambled to rebuild her social circle after Veronica's departure. The concept of being content with solitude was foreign to someone who had defined herself through group belonging for so long. As spring arrived, bringing college acceptance letters and plans for the future, a subtle shift occurred in how Wellington viewed Amira. The fear that had initially followed her confrontation with Veronica had evolved into something closer to legend. Younger students whispered about her when she passed in the hallways. Her reputation extended beyond Wellington's walls to neighboring schools, creating a mythology that bore little resemblance to reality. Amira took it all with the same composed indifference she'd shown toward the bullying. Neither adoration nor fear defined her self-perception. She remained focused on her studies, her training, and her future plans. One afternoon in late April, Amira found a plain white envelope in her locker. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery bearing an unfamiliar emblem, a stylized fist enclosed in a circle of ancient text. Below it a simple message: "Your grandfather knows what this means. It's time you did too." That evening she showed the letter to William, who studied it with a carefully neutral expression that couldn't quite hide his concern. "What is it?" Amira asked. "What does it mean?" William set the letter on the kitchen table, his weathered fingers smoothing its edges. "It's an invitation," he said finally. Of sorts. To what? There exists a network, he began carefully, of people like us. Families with traditions and martial disciplines that go beyond sport or self-defense. Some call it the circle. Amira sat across from him, absorbing his words. And this circle is... what? Contacting me? They're aware of you now, William confirmed. What happened at your school didn't stay contained. Word spreads in certain communities. Because I fought back against Veronica? William shook his head. Because of how you fought. Control. Precision. Restraint when it would have been easier to cause harm. These qualities are valued by those who understand true power. The revelation that others had been watching her, evaluating her actions without her knowledge, sent a chill through Amira. What do they want from me? To test you, William replied simply. To see if you're worthy of joining their ranks. And if I don't want to be tested? Amira challenged. Her grandfather's expression grew serious. That's not how this works. Once you're on their radar, you're either accepted or... He didn't finish the sentence. Or what? Amira pressed. Or you're considered a potential threat, he said finally. Power unaligned with their interests makes them nervous. Amira stood, pacing the kitchen as she processed this information. So all these years of training, of hiding who I really am, it wasn't just about self-defense or discipline. You were preparing me for this. William didn't deny it. Your mother faced the same choice once. She chose to join them. And my father? He was already a member when they met. Different family, same tradition. Amira sat heavily, the weight of revelation pressing down on her. Their deaths? Was it connected to this circle? William's silence was answer enough. The next morning, another letter appeared, this time on Amira's desk in first-period English, though no one had seen anyone approach her seat. The message was equally cryptic. Strength without purpose is wasted. Purpose without strength is meaningless. Which are you? Throughout the day, Amira felt a subtle shift in her awareness, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck that suggested observation. During lunch, she caught a glimpse of someone watching from beyond the school fence. A woman in nondescript clothing whose stance nonetheless marked her as a trained fighter. After school, Amira didn't go directly home. Instead, she went to the public park, finding a secluded bench where she could sit undisturbed. If she was being watched, let them watch on her terms. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, the same woman from the school fence appeared, taking a seat beside her without invitation. Amira Johnson, the stranger said, her voice carrying no particular accent. You've caused quite a stir in certain circles. I wasn't aware I had an audience, Amira replied, studying the woman carefully. She was perhaps in her 30s, with the lean, efficient build of someone who trained daily. Nothing about her appearance was remarkable, yet she carried herself with unmistakable confidence. You always have an audience, the woman said. Most people are just watching the wrong performance. And what performance are you watching? The woman smiled slightly. The emergence of someone with potential. Raw talent is common enough. Discipline can be taught, but the judgment you showed, knowing when to display power and when to withhold it, that's rarer than you might think. What do you want from me? Amira asked directly. It's not about what we want, the woman replied. It's about what you're capable of becoming. She stood, leaving a small carved wooden token on the bench between them. Your grandfather will explain what this means. The choice remains yours, but remember, choices have consequences. With that cryptic warning, she walked away, blending effortlessly into a group of passing joggers until Amira could no longer distinguish her from the others. That evening, Amira placed the wooden token on the kitchen table before her grandfather. His expression remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed recognition. They've moved faster than I expected, he said quietly. Tell me everything, Amira demanded. No more half-truths or vague warnings. I need to know what I'm facing. William nodded, resignation evident in his posture. For the next hour, he explained, in detail what Amira had only glimpsed before, a global network of fighting dynasties dating back centuries, operating in shadows, serving various interests that intersected with power, but existed separate from governments or official organizations. Your parents worked for the Circle, he confirmed. Elite operatives handling situations that required their particular skills. They were assassins, Amira said flatly, the pieces finally coming together. They were protectors, William corrected. Sometimes that meant eliminating threats. More often it meant prevention, negotiation, or demonstration of capacity. The shadow of power is often more effective than power itself. And they want me to follow the same path? They recognize your potential, William replied. As I always have. Amira fell silent, absorbing the full weight of what she'd learned. Her entire life, the training, the discipline, the constant emphasis on control, had been preparation for this moment. A legacy she hadn't chosen, but couldn't escape. Do I have a real choice? She asked finally. William considered his answer, carefully. There are always choices, but some paths once revealed can't be unseen. You can refuse them, but they won't forget you exist. That night, Amira climbed to the roof of their house, a childhood habit she'd abandoned years ago. The night spread before her, stars partially obscured by city lights. From this vantage point, Wellington Academy was visible in the distance, its buildings dark and silent. The contrast struck her forcefully, the petty social dynamics of high school against the global network her grandfather had described. Veronica's bullying, once the central conflict of her life, now seemed almost quaint in comparison to what awaited her. The next day, another letter arrived, delivered by an unassuming courier to the front door of their home. Unlike the previous cryptic messages, this one was direct. Your grandfather won the Northern Circuit Championship 3 consecutive years before retiring undefeated. Your mother dominated the Eastern trials at 19. Your father held the Western record for 5 years. What will your legacy be, Amira Johnson? We await your answer. The challenge was clear. Before she could respond, her grandfather appeared in the doorway of her room, his expression more serious than she had ever seen. Before you decide, he said, there's one more test. Between us. Amira understood immediately. You want to fight me? I need to know if you're ready, he replied simply. And you need to know if you can win. They descended to the basement, the training space that had been Amira's second home since childhood. As they took positions on the mat, Amira realized this would be the first time they had ever faced each other with full intent. No holding back, no teaching moments, just two fighters measuring their true capacity. The match that followed was unlike anything Amira had experienced. Her grandfather moved with a speed and precision that belied his age, drawing on decades of experience. Every technique she attempted, he seemed to anticipate. Every advantage she gained, he neutralized. Foresee. 30 grueling minutes they fought without speaking, their bodies communicating through the ancient language of combat. Sweat drenched both of them, breaths coming in controlled gasps as they pushed each other to their limits. Then, in a moment of perfect clarity, Amira saw the pattern, the subtle rhythm to her grandfather's movements, the fraction of a second, where his left side remained exposed after certain combinations. With calculated patience, she waited for the opening, then executed a sequence of strikes so precisely timed that William found himself momentarily defenseless. The final move connected with controlled force, sending him to the mat. For a moment, neither moved, both processing what had just occurred. Then, slowly, William rose to his feet, a smile spreading across his usually stoic features. Now they'll come for you, he said, pride evident in his voice. Amira nodded, understanding the significance of what had just happened. She had proven herself not just to her grandfather, but to whatever unseen observers might be monitoring her progress. That evening, she stood on the school rooftop again, reading the latest letter that had arrived, a formal invitation to what was described as a gathering of like minds. The morning would bring decisions and consequences, paths chosen that couldn't be unchosen. As she folded the letter, Amira felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The frightened girl who had hidden her true nature for years was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power and was ready to claim her legacy. Let them come, she whispered to the night sky, a smile playing at her lips as she imagined what awaited beyond the confines of Wellington Academy. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The first step toward something larger than she had ever imagined. The world beyond high school would soon discover what Veronica Taylor had learned the hard way. Underestimating Amira Johnson was a mistake no one made twice. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone who was trained to remain invisible finally decides to show their true power? What new battles await Amira now that she's embraced her legacy? Like this video, if you want to see what happens when she faces the circle, and subscribe for more stories about hidden strength finally unleashed.